Pinky and the Brain, Issue 1. After Brain says they're gonna try to take over the world as usual, saying that in the same way he always does for some reason, I find it amusing that Pinky says sarcastically, "Oh, well that'll be a nice change of pace, won't it?" I guess it's not meant to be sarcastic because Pinky's insane, but it could be. Brain says that if a huge amount of people all flush their toilets at the same time, it'll create a massive sucking effect, unparalleled in all of history, except by Waterworld. He must have heard one of the people working at the lab complain about that movie. He says that everyone within 100 feet of a toilet will be instantly sucked to the seat, letting him take over the world. We see chemical vials drip onto the padlock on his cage to break it. I love that he's so casual about how he did that no one comments on it as if he's done it tons of times. But if he did it even once, why did the lab workers even bother putting padlocks on his cage anymore? Pinky compliments him, and Brain says that he'd have to get all of those people to obey him for his plan to work when he doesn't have a following. I guess he doesn't have brainwashing technology made yet. Then they see a comic shop, and Brain doesn't know what's going on out here while Pinky does. So apparently Pinky gathers information on what people do in the world because Brain's always focused on his plans. Pinky says it's delivery day for the new comics, and he says he'd do anything for a real superhero because they're strong and fearless. And this inspires Brain to become one, even though he's not strong or fearless. He could use science to make that the case though. Pinky says that he'd need a tragic past that requires psychological counseling. He already has a tragic past. It makes sense that Brain starts getting mad at him for listing some characteristics of superheroes that are useless to him. Pinky's actually smart when he acknowledges that it's weird for your long hair to blow in the wind indoors, and that donning a pair of glasses shouldn't disguise your true identity. To be fair to Clark Kent, there'd be so many other guys with the same coloration as him and hair and so on have a similar shape to him. There's billions of people, so I can believe that even if someone noticed the similarity to Superman, they'd shrug it off as coincidence. Because even in real life, there's people that look a lot like other people without being related to them. I like that Pinky cared enough to learn so much about comics that he references all of this stuff. He's trying to have fun with what the world offers, enjoying it more than Brain, who hits him and says those aren't the qualities of a superhero. Why would he assume he's wrong when clearly the Brain isn't an expert on superheroes, while he is by comparison? He assumes that no superhero is super smart, for no reason, because he's not as smart as he thinks and never has been. I guess he's not familiar with Spider-Man. He says they're gonna go shopping to compile data on superheroes, and the narration mentions them visiting every comic shop. Brain says he's upgraded the lab computer. If it's the lab computer, that'd mean there's only one there somehow. So won't the lab workers notice? I guess they will, but they'll just assume Brain did it because they made him smart, and be grateful. He's made a computer named Gordon for some reason that talks, and connected him to the lab's laser beam array, which is connected to a small nuclear generator in the basement. Gordon will analyze the comics to make a list of every necessary characteristic for the perfect superhero and sidekick, and transform the mice accordingly. I'm being reminded of that Sonic Boom episode where Eggman tried to give himself superpowers just to somehow fail miserably. But this was before, and already it does a more thorough job with them gathering tons of comics. Pinky naturally points out that there's nothing a computer can learn about comics that he doesn't already know. Brain doesn't give a proper retort to that, like the fact that he doesn't have a perfect memory. Pinky's realistically offended at being told off for not having an off switch, which Brain could put on him. But he likes him too much to do it. He explains what sidekicks stereotypically have as common traits, but since all that info is useless, it makes sense that Brain's mad at him. But why doesn't he just tell him to shut up right away? He's not above that. It seems like he'll have none of the traits of his sidekick. Brain gets given a paper by the computer and reluctantly congratulates Pinky on being right. They decide to go into the chamber, and Pinky reveals that he brought a comic to read that's conveniently small enough for him to carry. I guess he uses Brain's computer and technology to print out much smaller versions of comic scans for him. Brain tells him that he doesn't know what effect inorganic material will have on the chamber. Then he should have told him not to bring anything to the chamber, but I don't blame him for not anticipating this. His comic explodes, covering them in soot. They get new outfits as they realize that inorganic material's always going to be in the chamber anyways, because the chamber consists of air and the material making it up. But he must have meant material other than that. Once outside, it turns out that the entire city has been turned into a place with superheroes and supervillains. Just because Pinky brought his comic into the chamber only designed to transform organic material and not do this. So that makes no sense. They get threatened, and lucky for Brain, the powers he's got are easy enough for him to think of that he figures out he can use them, throwing lightning from his head and having hard fists. It's too bad Brain didn't think to have his computer tell them what powers they'd get instantly to protect them. Pinky says he's got strong ears. How is that a really common superhero trait that the computer would think to give him? Eventually, they see someone trying to steal their only way home, and it's a cliche new character called Dark Brain, who exists for the same reason the new superheroes and villains do. It's silly. At least it's more creative than it could have been because he's called Dark Brain and not Evil Brain or Bad Brain. He tells Brain that there's no reason for them to be enemies because the Emperor who rules this world is really evil. Why is the world ruled by an evil emperor? Since when is that a really common thing in superhero comics? He tells Brain to join him, probably out of desperation. Brain thinks it'll increase his odds of ruling the world, because he's desperate. But Pinky refuses to let him team up with a villain because he's always seen him as a hero. And as Dark Brain's getting away holding a ladder, Pinky makes it impossible for them to go with him. Pinky cries thinking that he's losing him, and Brain does the smart thing and reassures him. He says that he was trying to get back to the computer and change everything back to normal so that it could take over the world he always wanted to rule. I guess it makes sense that he'd even care about what the world's like when he takes it over, because if it has superheroes and supervillains, it'll be too much of a hassle for him. Eventually, they go to the Brain Cave, and I assume by Brain saying that he's not remembering the adventures Pinky's recounting. Let alone the Brain Cave. So why were these adventures made a part of the world's past? Why did the machine, only programmed to upgrade their bodies, scan Pinky's mind for information on made-up adventures he thought up with him and Brain in a superhero-style city? He tells a boring, sad story about a dog and Dark Brain, and then he ends up with a bump on his head. And Brain calls him out on the story and says he's never had a dog. Then Brain picks up the phone, and the computer Gordon gives him his location and tells him to go to the splash page. Brain finds out he can't fly, but tried to do so without making sure he could first because he just assumed that flight was a common superpower. So why can Pinky fly but not Brain? Is it far more common for sidekicks? Pinky says it makes sense that they have different abilities according to their personality, but most of the time their new powers have nothing to do with their personality. The only way Pinky's flight makes sense is that he's an airhead, but he doesn't think he's one, and he's not really stupid in this issue. Aside from the fact that he doesn't look where he's going and flies into a volcano. We don't get to see them impact the volcano, and a lack of impact tries to keep Slapstick from being as funny. But I don't hate these characters enough to really want to see them get hurt anyways. As Pinky's flying, he thinks his ears are popping, and then a plane flies into them and they end up sprayed with windshield wiper fluid. I like that Pinky's optimistic, calling it refreshing. He also says it was nice of Wonder Woman to invite them in for the ride, off screen. I'm mostly enjoying Pinky so far. Brain wonders where she went. Why'd she leave? Pinky somehow doesn't know who Wonder Woman is, even though he's been shown to be really familiar with superhero fiction. And I know about her. He references that it was somehow fun being forced to tell the truth. I guess the reason that Wonder Woman untied Brain and let him do his own thing is that she assumed that as a tiny mouse, he'd have no chance of taking over the world anyways. So she irresponsibly let him go without even supervising him. I guess she was on her way to save people and fight villains. So she didn't have time to stay with him and make sure they'd be okay. Why couldn't we have seen her tie them up? So they find Gordon, and Dark Brain says there's no escaping the fortress and tells his guards to restrain Pinky. It makes no sense that he accuses Brain of being too good for the dark side, First of all, because it was clearly only Pinky's idea to not join him while he wanted to. But also, there's no way someone would refer to his side as the dark side. And this just annoys me by reminding me of when Flynn wrote Scourge to say the same basic thing to Sonic. It makes it even more annoying that he did that cliche that made no sense of him to do because he doesn't like Sonic. He says his powers can't hurt him, calling him do-gooder in another stilted line. He has no reason to assume Brain is that. Dark Brain says he forced Gordon to call him over here. Then Brain hits him. It's too bad we see a flash of light instead of his fist impacting him. He gets thanked because he was getting tired of his jabbering. I was too. Then Brain says anyone but you, and it's a Dark Pinky who's talking instead of Pinky. And he was the one pulling Dark Brain's strings, and he rules the world. That's more interesting. He says he has the psychic powers to read Brain's mind. We see Pinky and Brain tied up on a conveyor belt, headed towards a buzzsaw. It's nice of Brain to say he'll miss Pinky in their partnership. He won't be able to miss it after he dies, though, so why would he say that? Pinky says he'll miss him too. Pinky gets an idea and asks the other Pinky if he's thinking what he is. Dark Pinky reads his mind and is horrified and falls over. Pinky says he wasn't thinking at all. That has to be a lie because that wouldn't be horrifying. He'd just be annoyed that he wasted his time. Pinky chews off the ropes and we see them without their costumes. Why would Pinky ask if there's an in-flight movie? He asks if he'll need something to read. Brain says no because his comic got them into that mess, and he thinks they need to use another copy of the same issue to reverse what happened to that reality. Wouldn't the info on that issue already be stored in the computer because they had to scan it? In fact, it scanned it twice because it had to give him information that Pinky already gave him earlier. And yet both times it scanned the comic, it didn't keep storing that information. I guess it makes sense because it was never programmed to scan inorganic material, so that wasn't part of the design. Pinky ends up discovering that Dark Pinky has the same issue as him, which makes sense because he's another version of him. So they use the machine, and Brain says he succeeded in taking over the world. Pinky hands him a comic about their adventure, which he must have made, and we do see him holding a pencil. Brain somehow thinks nobody would want to read about his failures. It's like Brain is the stupid one. He's lacked intelligence when it counts more times than him so far. He only talks smart. For no reason, Pinky says he thought they were going to take over the world next month instead of next night, even though they try to do that every day. This issue by Bob Wells had Brain try to turn him and Pinky into superheroes. But somehow, just because Pinky brought a comic book into the machine that was only designed to upgrade organic beings with magical powers, the machine decided to transform everything outside of it to be a city like the one in the comic, even though it's not designed to do anything to the world outside of it. So the new talking computer ends up kidnapped by a redundant evil twin of Brain, who seems to have nothing different about him beyond costume. He somehow thinks that Brain doesn't want to join him, even though it was clearly only Pinky who wanted to keep him from doing that, because he thinks that Brain is well-intentioned, and would never trust anyone else who wants to take over the world. It would make sense that he'd assume the other Brain would actually want all the power to himself, and just want to use him anyways. So it just spared him disappointment. Ironically, Pinky was the main person who was useful and smarter in this story, while it was mainly Brain who lacked common sense. Pinky was the one who flew while carrying Brain to get him to that place, and convinced Dark Pinky to read his mind and somehow black out because of it. And he lied to Brain about what he was thinking about so that he wouldn't get scared of him from now on. Then he chewed apart the ropes and figured out that Dark Pinky would have the same issue as him to get the world back to normal. I was worried I'd find Pinky annoying as someone who just says impossibly stupid things and could make unacceptable mistakes because he's the idiot. But no, he was great in this story. So far this is a good story, even if it is too cliche and lazy because it just imitates superhero fiction as much as possible. So it'll be the next story that'll have the creativity I respect the series for. So really it's not the best issue to start out the comic with. I liked how genre-savvy and self-aware Pinky was about superhero fiction, and how Dark Pinky was the real mastermind. So it was worth it. But of course, there was missed opportunity because we have no idea how Pinky would have run the world. Dark Pinky just said he did. You would think that the Brain would want to become a superhero again, and he would just make himself a superhero again, but without Pinky having a comic with them this time. So he would be a superhero for the rest of the comic.